Seeing a presence of a quorum, I'm calling to order this meeting of the Amherst School Committee at 6:30 on Thursday, April 27th. And our first item up is approval of minutes, and we have minutes for 3 of our last meetings. I don't know, did folks have time to review them? Seeing some nods. Okay. Any edits to the minutes from January 24th?
I have an edit.
Jennifer?
In the superintendent's update, it says the superintendent the district had sent a survey to gather information on what kind of leader the Wildwood community is looking for. And on the next page, it says, Shao asked who is completing the survey, and Morris confirms Crocker Farm families will be completing the survey. But I assume that should be Wildwood families will be completing the survey, right?
Since I said it, yes, that's
Yeah.
correct.
Okay. So I think it's
And whether
just
the notes are wrong or I said it wrong, the intent was there to me. Yeah.
Okay, so that's one edit.
Which page is that?
It's on page 2, the very top of page 2. It says Shao asked
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Crocker Farm families. And then at the very bottom, there's like a repeated sentence or two under adjournment. Maybe
Oh, it looks
one
like the-
repeated
yep,
sentence.
The
yeah.
line was copied.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's it.
And I have one note on the chair's update. Where did it go? There it is. That I provided clarification in regard to an article that appeared in the Gazette that described an action with employees within the district. I think it's not the owner of records, but the employer of record, singular. So replace owner with employer, and singular record. Any other changes on January? No? Looking at February 16th minutes.
So in, let's see, Action A, 6th grade to arms, timeline and staffing. The motion, what's in the minutes is that the motion to delay the move of 6th grade to the middle school to fall of 2025 or fall of 2026 and make the decision by 2024. But I believe the motion was to make the decision by November of 2024.
Correct.
So that should be added.
It's an important
Yeah.
change. Any other edits on February?
It's not
Mike?
just Marquita's taking notes tonight, and she'll make the corrections to these minutes. So,
Okay.
but she's working virtually tonight, so she's watching, and we'll make those.
Great.
amendments. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great.
And we appreciate having all of them. So thank you.
Thank you.
And March 14th, any edits on that?
So I don't know if the minutes are complete. I mean, on page 5, it says, Shao requested a 5-minute break, and then under discussion C, class size policy, there's nothing there. Or is it early? I don't know if it's earlier or maybe that just needs to be filled in. Did we discuss it?
I don't think we did have a discussion. Mike?
Yeah, so this is, I'm sorry, I meant to preview this one. So the video, that was the night we had video challenges. So I think someone does probably not need to volunteer to do the recollection of, I think it's this one. I'll work on that, but I think that someone's going to need to fill that in because there's not a video and audio of the last couple items in that meeting. And someone was doing it virtually, so
Yep.
they're not able to complete it. I'm sorry, I meant to preview that. My apologies.
Thank you. Do you have notes?
Yeah, I have one simple one. So my last name is Herrrington.
It's not the first time you've said that in
Yes.
your life, I imagine.
Yep,
Yeah.
it's gone.
I'm looking at my notes, and it appears I did not take any written notes. I might have, otherwise I would happily volunteer, but let me see if I have them here. Peter?
I have some notes, but I don't think I can pull them up in an efficient way right now.
Okay. We'll take this offline and we'll review these next time. And if for each of us, if we have any notes, just send them to me and I'll compile them and share them with Mike to get them into the minutes. Great. So I move that we approve, whoops, no, I lost the page. I move that we approve the minutes as amended for January 24th, 2023 and February 16th, 2023.
Second.
I don't know who was first. Moved by Allison, seconded by Ben. Any further discussion? And we'll take a vote. All in favor? Unanimous. Passes unanimously. Thank you. Next is public comment. We did not receive any written comment or voicemail comment tonight. Any members of the community? Peter? Looked at Peter and then to
I
Mike.
wonder, since we're a little ahead of schedule, maybe I'm comfortable giving superintendent updates to give people time because it says 6:40 there, and
Oh, okay.
you know, would that be okay with
Yes.
the committee?
Thank you.
And then you could reopen it. So superintendent update. Our sixth grade graduations are starting to be scheduled. So Thursday, June 15th at Crocker Farm at 9:30. Wednesday, June 14th at 9:30 at Fort River, and I'll get you Wildwoods soon enough. But all that kind of last week of school, they're again trying to figure out if we can do it outside under 10. People have liked that, and so it's also it's not just a safety precaution. It's actually people don't really want to go back to being in gyms in the elementary school. So I think that's a lovely thing. And then you don't worry about seating capacity and impact on the rest of the students in the school, because that's always, and then when you do lunches and you're scrambling to finish graduation so that kids can eat, and it avoids a lot of those conflicts. Last night I had a lovely experience at the Grinspoon, the Excellence in Teaching Awards. There were 3 award winners from our district. I've said them months ago, but we had the event last night. So it was Ms. Santos, Mr. Bodkin, who are both 3rd grade teachers at Fort River, and Miss Lincoln, who's a music teacher at Crocker Farm. So people brought their family and others. There was also a secondary person, but I'll do that at a different time. Ms. Santos won the New Teacher Award. So we have 3 teachers across the districts who are veteran teachers, and 1 teacher who's a relatively new teacher. But just really lovely time. Commissioner Riley came out and made introductory comments, which was very nice of him. It just happened to be a lovely evening as well. So it was sort of indoor, outdoor, and just really, really nice to be in a social setting and people relaxed and enjoying themselves. This afternoon, I was asked and happy to go to it's May is Jewish American Month in the United States. About 15 years ago or something, it was set up, and it was a proclamation in town. So a number of town councilors read the proclamation, as well as the rabbi from the JCA made some comments. Just a really lovely event. There was a number of community members there as well, and just a nice tradition that last year was the first year this happened in Amherst, and just really happy to connect with town when they are doing those celebrations. So I will do better to try to let folks know ahead of time. This one I didn't know that far ahead of time, but in general, I think the town is really working hard to kind of acknowledge different residents and different identities, and I'm happy to participate in that. We have a number of events coming up. So May 17th in the late afternoon, we're having a preschool reading event, and that is funded partially by a grant. So we have many early childhood books. We're trying to invite all the 3 to 5-year-olds in the larger community, even if they don't go to preschool at Crocker Farm, to that event, and particularly students who where access to books might be more of a challenge. Jones Library will be there with library card and library card set up in the back. And a number of fun things. So if you know anyone who's, this will be in our newsletter and everything, but between 3 and 5, and you think would enjoy that, it's May 17th, I believe, 5:30 in the Crocker Farm cafetorium. But it's for a community event, not just for our students. The next night, May 18th, is the Multicultural Fair at Wildwood. Some of you may have been to that. It's a lovely event. So this is the first time since 2019 that we're having it. It's outdoors. Last year we had it in a muted way, and this is full back, and lots of different presentations, events, and the fashion show is always the highlight. So not my necessarily I don't participate in the fashion show, as you all see every Tuesday night, but nonetheless, the kids have a great time with it, and it's a lovely community event where lots and lots of families come, so as well as their students. June 1st and 8th, we're doing a little differently this year. We're having a family math night where someone who's one of the lead trainers for iReady is coming in to work with families over math activities that can be done over the summer months. There's a whole suite of tools from iReady that are available to families beyond the school year, and the importance of staying connected to mathematics. You know, a lot of times you hear summer reading, and there's a good reason why summer reading is important, but there's also summer math and some of the activities that can be real world and applicable. So I think it's different by different grade level bands. Again, this will come out, but you know, sort of like K to 2 one night and 3 to 5 or 3 to 6, excuse me, the next of those nights. So and thanks again to Derek Shea, because he has the best space. We lean on him a lot, and that's also in the Crocker Farm cafetorium. So someday, maybe it won't always have to be a Crocker Farm, but for now that really works well for us. It's not for Crocker Farm families, it's for families across the district. You all know, and we've talked about, that Nick Yaffe is retiring, so asked him what he wanted for his retirement to honor it, and so what he wanted is that on June 2nd in the evening, I think it's also 5:30, that's a weekend, it's a Friday evening, it's just a meet and greet for any current, former, or future Wildwood, Marks Meadow families, or anyone who wants to come. And Expandable Brass Band will be there, which is always fun, but it's, you know, no speeches, just, you know, a little bit of food, but it's really just a time to relax and people to, you know, see Nick off. So hopefully people are able to attend. Again, this will all come out soon, you know, more formally in the newsletter. But what he wanted was to make sure that he was able to see people, and people who would like to come would be able to see Nick before his retirement later that month. So that's Nick, right? But no speeches is an absolute. He said there's no microphone for that. We're not doing that. It's really supposed to be just an informal gathering, which is lovely and says a lot about who Nick is. Last week was break week, as you know, and so with the Crocker Farm Cuppies project, we put it out to bid, and procurement's a challenge for some relatively small projects. So we didn't get the sufficient number of bids to move forward with that, but I want to thank our facility staff, because we aimed to get 2 of the cubbies out, and they got 5 of the cubbies out, which is about a third of the total project. So they did it just over break week, and as you know, break week, Monday's a holiday for everyone. So incredible amount of work. So we're going to do this in-house, and the work was done really well. I talked to Derek, he was over there seeing it, and teachers felt really good about the extra space. So we prioritized classrooms that next year may have larger class sizes, but we got beyond that based on the work of the facility staff last week. Finally, next week, 5th graders will be visiting the Book and Plow Farm at Amherst College for a field trip experience, which is co-hosted by the farm, the Mead Art Museum, and the school gardening program. And they'll move through different activity stations. Students get to know the farm, look at works of art, and have opportunities to create art of their own, all while exploring connections between plants, land, history, and power. And so lots of people have been working on this, but I do want to thank Amherst College, because we are rebuilding and continuing our relationship with them in a plethora of ways. There was a number of students at I think I mentioned a different committee who were over there yesterday. Saw some pictures. That was a lovely event. So this is all happening next week for 5th graders at Fort River, Crocker Farm, and Wildwood on different days. Hopefully the weather forecast changed. Looks like it may be a little rainy week, but that's not bad for a farm, I suppose. So we may have to adjust things based on that, but really appreciate the new opportunities our students are having in the collaboration. And that is my update for the evening.
Thank you. Any questions? Jennifer?
So regarding the Crocker Farm Cuppy project, that's fantastic that you were able to do more than was planned over April break. So what percentage done would you say it is?
I believe that's a third.
Okay,
In the
fantastic.
ballpark?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's accurate.
Yeah, sorry to put the other hat on, but I'm just looking for my expert help on the other side of the table. But yeah, there's some rooms, like kindergarten rooms are different. We're not necessarily doing that because of the age of kids, but also the rooms are larger. And, some of the rooms that are multi-purpose rooms we don't feel the same about, but, we tried to hit on the classrooms, particularly targeting the ones that might have the largest class size within Crocker Farm next year. But, that will be summer project and continued project, but we exceeded our, I should also say that the facilities department was also at Crocker Farm working on the outdoor space, some of the playground area, wood chips and some of that structure over time, kids are playing on it and it wears out, and just making sure that it's safe, particularly in the back and some of the areas in the front. So a lot of facilities employees over at Crocker Farm last week doing a lot of work for the school inside and out. It was a busy place.
Terry.
Cool. Any other questions? Peter?
Yeah, so thank you for the update. So you mentioned the back playground just now. So any update on what the plan is to replace that? Just, you may have already given it a couple months ago, but I don't know if there was like short-term improvements and then a longer-term replacement, or that it related to CPA money and whatnot.
Yeah, it's focused on longer-term replacements, so there's not much of an update to offer right now. Yeah. Really, the short term is about safety. You know, that's where the focus is at the moment.
Any other questions? No? Okay. And we'll move back and open the floor for public comment, since it's now 6:46. We did not receive any any email comment, text, or voicemail. And just as a reminder for folks watching at home, we, and I know this question has come up, we accept public comment by email to scpubliccomment@arps.org, arps.org. We accept text message or voicemail message to the phone number that I'm going to have to look it up, 413-362-1891, or by joining us in person here. And so with that, I'll look to see if anybody in this room would like to speak public comment. Seeing none, then I will close public comment and move on to our next item, which is a chair's update. The only update I have is not necessarily related to Amherst School Committee business, but another school committee. The negotiating subcommittee of the regional school committee was supposed to meet in mediation yesterday evening, and the mediator had a family emergency, and so we had to cancel. So the next session was rescheduled to Monday, May 2nd at 4:15 p.m. May 1st. Did I say April 1st? You
said May 2nd.
Oh, thank you.
Something else is happening on that day.
Monday, May 1st at 4:15 p.m. in the cafeteria at the middle school is that session. And a second session on Tuesday, May 2nd has also been tentatively scheduled for the same time and place. And as you mentioned, May 2nd, we're in the process right now. There's a vote happening in the town of Amherst for the debt exclusion to fund the elementary school building project, which we do have a brief update on our agenda this evening. Early voting is open, 8 to 4:30 tomorrow.
I believe today was the last day.
Today was the last day, sorry. So if you have not voted, there's still opportunity to vote on Tuesday. School committee updates. Do any school committee members have updates? I do want to look at our joint capital planning committee representatives because we haven't had a report on the capital planning. I think it's Irv and Jennifer, so I'm not sure if the report was given, what of the school committee capital was approved or included. And if you're not prepared, maybe at our next
Definitely
meeting.
not prepared.
Okay.
The report has been issued, and maybe Irv and I will get together and make a report at the next meeting.
Right.
That would be appreciated, since the role is representing the school committee on that board. Next is new and continuing business. And first up is math and general curriculum update. So we have guests. Welcome.
Yeah, and I'll cue this up. Mary and Stephanie are here, and there's a lot of slides. I want you to know that that was done intentionally so that the presentation could be shorter because you would have the context. So I know we've gotten, there are a lot of slides, but we've gotten that feedback, and so we try to provide more information on the front end and have more of a discussion when we're actually at the meeting instead of rolling through slides one by one. So. But it was, posted publicly as well. But I just want to appreciate the work that Mary and Stephanie and folks in the buildings have done. This is more focused than already, but there's other curriculum updates as well that you'll hear about this evening. But I think with that, I'll turn it over to Mary and Stephanie, and just
Thanks, Mike.
let me know
Sure,
when you
we're
want to
ready.
advance.
Thanks. So we're really excited to be here tonight to talk to you and to give you a mid-year update. We spent a lot of time together last year thinking about a new elementary math curriculum. So we're happy to give you some information about where we are. So you might remember that one of the main reasons we were interested in iReady was because of it was so data-driven and provided such support for differentiation. And those are two priorities in our district. And that happens especially via the iReady diagnostic tool, which we're going to talk to you about tonight. So here's a list of some of the features of the test. I'm not going to read them, but just tell you a few things. It is computer adaptive, which means it's a smart test. So when a student responds, the test will either get harder or easier, depending on how the student has responded. It takes about an hour. Students do this 3 times a year. And what's really exciting, I think, about this test is that it provides a mountain of data. As you've probably already seen if you've looked at the report, at the student level, at the class level, the grade level, the district level, the school level. But more than that, it really connects directly to instruction and provides opportunities for teachers to use the information provided to drill directly down into what's happening in their classes. So we'll talk about both those features tonight.
So to gather all of that data in the diagnostic, you can see in the middle of this slide that it then generates 2 kinds of reports for us. So at the bottom, you'll see that the diagnostic report is one that actually gives us the results of the students' measures of growth, and it informs the kind of data that we're sharing in the slides with you this evening. On the top, the second report that it generates is called the prerequisites report. And this one is the one that informs all the differentiated needs of students to help guide instruction. And then with a simple click at the point of use, teachers can also, as you see to the right, move to digital resources that they can then use immediately to support students in differentiated ways. And this next slide offers us a chance to see that there are 5 levels of student performance that you're going to see reflected in a number of the slides that are coming up. Those levels of performance are going to be depicted in colors from green to red. Green for students who are at grade level in the middle of the year or above grade level, a little paler green, students who are early on in the grade level. Yellow is students who are about 1 grade level below, and then 2 to 3 grade levels below. You'll note at the top that the results of the diagnostic are criterion referenced, which means that the scores are linked to math skills, which are attached to a pre-designated performance level. And in this case, it's the level of performance we would expect at the grade level. So it's not a measure of students against other peers on these particular assessments. And on this one, you can see that the BOY arrow is beginning of the year assessment. So when the students first took this brand new curriculum to us last fall, and they took this the beginning of October to mid-October, depending on their grade level. Kindergarten didn't take this till about the middle of October. And then the bolder lines represent the MOY, or the middle of the year testing, by the end of January. And you can see to the left that there are 4 domains that are assessed. So math skills that I mentioned are those criterion references of number and operations, algebra and algebraic thinking, measurement and data, and geometry. And then as we look ahead, all 4 of those domains are merged on this site. So we see all of our district-wide data. So as you look from the beginning of the year, the skinnier little bar at the bottom, where our students were as they started the year, and you can see the kind of growth towards grade level proficiency that the green to red bars indicate at the top, and you can see how our yellow and red bars have minimized over the course of the year, which is the kind of progress we would want to see.
So this slide moves us beyond the district level to state and national levels. And it's going to be displayed in 2 slides because it was too much data to show in one slide. So this is K to 2. And you can see on the bottom, this is potentially confusing. There's national norms and national in-school. So the national in-school this is the comparison to all students across the country who took iReady, the diagnostic mid-year. The national norms are when they were setting up, benchmarking the diagnostic to begin with, and that was done during 1819. So it's interesting to see that the performance overall is stronger on that bar because it was pre-COVID. But you can see Amherst looks very good, really on all the grades. You can go, Mike, to the, compared to the state and the national. And again, what we want to see is, as we go on, not just this year, but in coming years, we want to see the green expanding, because that's kids who are working early on grade level, at grade level or above. And the yellow also, the kids who are working in yellow, they're judged to be 1 year below, but that's still, they're ready to work on grade level standards, and that's the goal, to get everyone to grade level proficiency. So what you'll see in the bunch of slides that we have coming up, they're going to show 2 benchmarks for growth on all of these. And just like the MCAS, for example, they show us like how students are relative to grade level, what standards they should be able to do by grade level, but it also shows us how much they're growing. When you get an MCAS report, you get, you know, a measurement of how they are in relation to grade level standards and also a growth percentile. So it's a similar kind of thing here. And typical growth is the one we'll focus on the most. In a year, that's the growth that they expect a student in an iReady classroom to make over the course of the year. They've calibrated this. And so at the end of the year, a student should make 100% of their growth. Mid-year, they should make 50% of their growth, of that amount that they have determined they should grow by. The stretch growth is, I guess it's sort of aspirational growth, because if a student who is behind, for example, is working on standards that are below grade level, only makes typical growth every year, that student will never progress, will never catch up. And so there's also a stretch growth target, but it is aspirational. About 30% of kids nationally reach their stretch growth target. So here's a look at how our district did mid-year on, again, the annual typical growth. So they would expect by the end of the year, everyone would be at 100%, middle of the year, 50%, we're at 60% mid-year. So that was quite good, considering that we're really just starting. And here's the stretch growth. So on this slide, you want to look on the right-hand side. So quite surprisingly, 9% of kids in our district by mid-year had already met their stretch growth. So that's pretty impressive. But you would expect that in the last 3 bars, three bars on the right-hand side, it's almost a third of students, actually. So that's pretty strong. And this, again, we want to focus mostly on the annual typical growth. So that's the first column after the grade level. And we want to calibrate it against that 50% that would be typical, or the 60% that we had for our district. So you can see that the range is from 43 to 73%. The lowest one would be grade 3, which is not entirely surprising, because remember, these would be the students who were in kindergarten when school closed, and then had first grade in a year that was largely remote. So now we're going to start looking at district data by these different subgroups.
So we have quite a number of slides here that you probably saw, so we can break down the district data both by grade level and by these demographic groups. And we'll just offer a few points of analysis as we move through them, so that you can get a little bit of sense. The first of these begins with female and male students in this binary breakdown, because we're limited to that binary kind of breakdown in our demographic data, the way we collect it. As Mary mentioned, if you consider a focus of 50% typical growth by the middle of the year, we'll see that if that's considered a target, that we're going to see that at most grades it's close to that target or above that target. But if we move ahead to the next page with grade 3 on it, we'll see, if we pause there, we'll see a dip again at 3rd grade that's below that expected 50% annual growth, Because again, as Mary mentioned, this is the grade level students across our nation that experience the most interruptions to their learning. But if you move on to grade 4 and 5, you see again the expected kind of typical growth that we planned for by the middle of the year, we hoped for by the middle of the year. On the next page, we move on to consider the breakdown of Hispanic, Latino students. Again, most of them at or above that 50% typical growth in the early grades, and then as we approach grade 3 again, we see that it dips below that anticipated 50% annual growth, and then reaches those kind of measures at grades 4 and 5.
Can I just note one thing? I'm sorry to interrupt as I'm mostly doing slides. On the right side, you could see the number, that's the N size. The N size is pretty decent on these, because sometimes when we break into demographic groups, but especially by school, the N size gets really small, and sometimes it loses meaning. But the N size on these is pretty decent across the board, so I just wanted to note that.
When we get to a slide in a minute, Mike, that shows a broader range of breakdown by race, that's a caution we're definitely going to make, I agree. So these are special education students. So again, yes means they're on students who are receiving special education services. No, they're not. And we were pleased by those results, and those are by grade. You can dig in at your leisure more deeply. And this is going to be a series of 6 slides, so it's grade by grade with the breakdowns. And again, as Mike said, one caution would be that if you look over to the right, some of those sample sizes are very small. And the building leaders were very keen to have this data because they know who these students are and to dig into it in detail. But I think we're just looking at it as a whole, we have to have that caution in mind. Okay.
Thank you. So as we mentioned a little earlier, there are 2 kinds of reports that come out of the diagnostic assessment. They're generated instantaneously, so our educators can go right onto the data platform of iReady and have access to these reports. We'll take a look at this prerequisite report in a minute. We are finding, educators are reporting, our math coaches are reporting that this is feeling very powerful to teachers and our building leaders. So what happens is that the diagnostic report gives teachers immediate information about whole class needs, as well as very precise skills that different discrete groups of students need. And those skills are listed out for teachers so they know exactly what the gaps are in skills that need to be mastered from prior years. And that can also give them groupings that are possible for them that can be very flexible, but they can offer them the opportunity to work with those students in very differentiated ways. So we know this is very small. This is an example of a diagnostic report when it comes up on the platform. And this is not Amherst, so this is a fictional group, but we can see in this report that these students in this class are preparing for a unit on multiplying and dividing decimals and fractions. You see that in the Unit A box. Teachers also get to look at a learning progression for this unit and see that automatically. There's a video there that shows that kind of unit flow for teachers to kind of access. That's accessible from a number of points, but it's right here on the prerequisite report for them. It gives them the whole class information in box B. And then if we can scroll down a little bit, Mike, on the left in box C, here's this list of prerequisite skills that are noted. So among them, we see understanding division is equal sharing and modeling fractions as parts of a whole and understanding multiplicative comparison. And then there's always at least one very essential skill that students will need to engage in meaningful ways with the grade level curriculum for this particular unit. And in this case, it's the skill of multiplying fractions by a whole number. And then we see to the right that the prerequisite report has taken and divided the students into 4 groups based on their skill needs. So that first group, Group A, we're seeing lots of green check marks. Those students tested in a way on the diagnostic that indicates they're ready for this grade level work. Group B, again, very ready for this grade level work, with perhaps some little bits of additional support that would come in regular small group work within our core learning blocks. And then if we take a look at Group C in Block D there, where they're labeled D, even though it's Group C, we see that there are 3 skills here in red that these students really need an in-depth review on, that they probably didn't master in the prior grade. And if the teacher clicks on those skills there, it will take them again right to lessons that they can use to pre-teach into those skills to support students. The other important thing to know is that the diagnostic you probably noted on an earlier slide, well, it generates these 2 reports. It also calibrates the personalized individual learning for each student, gives each student a pathway, digital pathway of lessons called My Path. I had a teacher yesterday who called it iPath, which I thought that's also really appropriate. And and so as students are working on that, we know from research from Curriculum Associates that if students are working on that about 40 minutes a week, kindergarten more like 30 minutes a week, that they make the most progress. And in fact, we've seen that, we've substantiated that in the work that's happening in our buildings. So these skills that need to be addressed here are also embedded in that My Path work for individualized work by the students as well.
I think this also, it's important because it makes possible a real paradigm shift where teachers are not just focusing on reteaching, but they're focusing on pre-teaching. Because this is set up not one time, that's set up for every unit and every lesson. And so these groups are flexible groups because what children need to be successful with a particular topic varies and will change, which is really nice. So kids, you remember in your own schooling, like everybody knew who was in the Bluebirds group and who was in the Ravens. It's not like that. It changes with each lesson, but also teachers can access this and prepare for it. Mike set up last spring extra math time, so they have 60 minutes a day of core math instruction plus what we call personalized learning time. Some of it is for literacy, some of it's for math, but during that extra math time, those 30-minute blocks, students will access the My Path, and teachers and special education teachers can work with students in small groups on these prerequisite needs. So over time, we're really hoping that's going to become just a really strong feature of how things run.
So this is the last slide on iReady. So if it's okay with everybody, I think it'd be a good place to pause. There's some other math, and some other curricular areas, but this was a lot of information and content. So if it's okay with the group, I think if there's questions,
Yeah.
that would be right.
Yeah. That was incredible. I think just the first comment is just that just reading these slides at home ahead of time and seeing the amount of data and the power of the information that you all have available is just phenomenal. And in a way, just listening to you describe it too, just puts a focus for the teachers, it sounds like, more on teaching and supporting and coaching as opposed to assessing, which just listening to you talk about it is just really nice to hear and to see that progress. I don't have immediate questions. I'm going to sort of open the floor to others. Peter?
Yeah, thank you very much. I have several questions, but I'll just ask my first one. So I guess it's just the first comment is that it looks like we made a good decision with the system. It's impressive the amount of structure and personalized data you can get given that level of testing. I mean, you can't avoid all testing, right? And no parent wants their kids to be tested ad nauseum. But given the number of hours per year that's required of the student to be at a computer testing, this produces quite a lot. So that's really nice to see. And it's also nice to hear the positive feedback from staff. I guess I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about if is there some differentiation in the staff feedback? Are the teachers in K-1 expressing that certain things are harder to implement than the grade 4 and 5 teachers? But I guess the biggest takeaway I get is what you talked about with the third graders. And it makes me wonder what we can do for them in order to help catch them up, given the significant difference there. And I'll just say from a school committee perspective, it's really sobering to see that now quantified. A concern that, 3 years ago, we talked about ad nauseum, and about how deeply concerned we all were about the impact of students being remotely taught for so long, especially for our students with special needs and especially for our youngest learners. And, our staff did absolutely the best job they could under the circumstances, but there's a limit to the circumstances. And, yeah, it's we can't go back and change the past now, but it's a pretty difficult thing to see, knowing how hard we tried to get those kids back in person and how long that it took. But anyway, so just what we can do for the third graders is my main question.
Mike?
Before Stephanie and Mary jump in, I saw a report either this week, at the beginning of this week or the end of last week, where there's something called NWEA. They do a map testing. It's another kind of assessment company, and they found the same results nationwide because lots of districts use that product in reading. That third grade was significantly below the standards as compared to the others. So this phenomenon that that is being described and discussed is not local to Amherst, and it's not local to math. It does seem like it's pervasive that grade level in particular is seeing the largest impact of everything you just described. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt Mary and Stephanie,
Sure.
but I just think it was helpful to read that, having seen this data, to think about the broader context.
Yeah, I would just say, Peter, I think the first step is to have really high-quality instructional materials, and we have that in place now. We didn't have that in place before, also. Before COVID, it was very uneven. As a high school math teacher, I told Mike that was why I was interested in coming to this position, because I could see how the tremendous variation at the elementary level in how students were being prepared was impacting their ability to be successful at the high school level. And so we have consistency and we have high-quality instructional materials, and I think those are really the first steps. Because when kids were getting uneven, when there were many different things being done in many different classrooms, that really just doesn't serve students well in a subject like math especially.
Irv?
I was blown away by this. I was looking at, I'm old school, I gotta print stuff out. That's who I am. But I was blown away by the report. The technology is extraordinarily incredible in terms of the depth of what it can go. So I have several questions, and some of them are concerns, not concerns, but one of the things, the first thing I saw was now in the second year of 3-year grant. I said, well, what happens with the grant at the end? What happens after the end of the grant?
I think we're not on that one yet.
What? We aren't?
We haven't talked about open science yet.
All right.
We're
Outstanding.
talking,
All right, so I don't know what slide you were up to. And I'm looking at the typical, the diagnostic results report.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, are we up there?
Yeah, we're on slide 28. I don't know.
28.
Yeah, so we did all the
Yeah,
already
well,
slides.
Yeah, my eyes ran out at 45. Anyway. One of the things that jumped out at me, and I don't know what slide this is, the diagnostic results report. I don't know what slide it is, but the thing that jumped out at me on that one was that the last sentence of the stretch growth, slide number 12, where it says all students should aim to meet their stretch growth measure by the end of the school year. And I'm thinking, yeah, the students should, but what about the teacher and student aiming to make that? Because it's just not the student. I mean, you can't put it all on the student. It has to be student-teacher. It's a team kind of a thing. It's a shared responsibility for meeting goals.
For sure.
I mean, am I off there, or?
No, I agree with you completely.
All right. I mean, it's just something, anyway, I thought it was something that just jumped. and so I'm not sure where we are here, because I went through and was reading all of this, and I got to the data, the grade level progress by race in kindergarten. If we're not up there, then we can come back to it.
No,
We're up there.
we're up there.
All right, so it's extraordinary information, and it's data that all of us should be looking at and in some ways very concerned about. When you go from kindergarten, so we can get back here. When I look at kindergarten data, Black or African American is 83%. All right, and then when I start tracing that through, at grade 1, it's 48%. That's a hell of a drop-off.
It is, it's not the same students, of course. and-
Yeah, and that's the other question is how your data is integrated, and how the similarity in data is similar to those students who were tested and not tested, or who didn't go through this and who then came in. I mean, the data variations would be extraordinary. And since I, from the outside, don't know that, I can only go by the raw data you're giving me, which means I have to ask questions about what is the consistency in terms of the population over time.
Sure, and I think the longitudinal data will be really important to look at, but we don't have very much of that yet. We just have the 2 administrations of the diagnostic, so, because these are all different student groups, right? For K1, and K is one group.
Oh, so they're different groups
They're
of
different
students.
groups. It's
They're
not
the
over
same
time.
groups of students.
It is not,
So when
not
I'm
not
looking
yet,
at
but we'll
this,
want to have that
when I'm
data.
looking at this, then is no way for me to tell whether this data is relevant to a continuous longitudinal group of students.
No, it's just a snapshot
It's just
in
a
time.
snapshot.
Right.
That's really helpful, but otherwise, the data would indicate some incredible issues.
Right, and I think just, if I could just say, this is our first year we're doing the program, but over time, I appreciate, and we're looking at it the same way you're looking at it, is we want to follow cohorts over time to track in the way that you're suggesting, but that,
Right.
we only have the one cohort yet, because it's the first year.
I think it would be helpful as a point of reference and information to indicate that in the report. Otherwise, a person like me looking at it says, wow, what's happening there? Well, this discontinuous groups, then obviously it makes sense.
I think it is notable, though, that as we look at first grade in Black and African American, and as you noted, that if the annual typical expected growth rate for the middle of the year is 50%, it's very close to that, it's 48%. So I agree, it's different than what was reflected for the kindergartners. Again, this is a brand new curriculum, and so for our kindergartners, it would have been, again, assessing different skills than it would have been for the first graders, right?
No, I mean, again, it's just, yeah, for me, it would have been, all right, I would love to have known that, then I wouldn't have been so, wow, what is this? Anyway.
Jennifer?
So all this reporting is fantastic. So all the reporting is based on data that's taken in by a diagnostic test that students take 3 times a year, and it takes an hour. Do they do it in one sitting?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I was thinking that earlier, that Peter mentioned about testing, and no one wants their children testing all the time. We're very cognizant of that. Teachers are very aware of that. And so one of the things we really appreciate about the diagnostic is that you can stop and start. You can turn it on and off. Kids can take a break and start another day.
Good.
The other couple of interesting things are that it has rush flags that pop up for the teacher to know that a child isn't really doing it. They're just kind of rushing through. They're alert flags. And there are ways that teachers can monitor as it's going through. There's an awful lot of kinds of preparation and cheerleading kinds of things that go on in our classrooms too, that the curriculum has supported us to do.
It also doesn't measure, it's not really linked to the iReady curriculum per se. It measures student growth in those 4 domains of mathematics. And there are people many districts who buy this tool who don't have iReady Classroom Math, just because they find it so useful. It's way more useful if you can connect it to the prerequisites report, like Stephanie was explaining, but there are many districts who just buy the diagnostic tool.
Okay, thanks. So my follow-up question is, about the testing. So, as we probably know, not every student is good at taking tests, and there are some students for whom the test results might not reflect their actual learning. So, are there any concerns about that there are some students for whom their test result doesn't reflect their learning? Or is there a way for teachers to give, qualitative input on a student's progress that's not going to be reflected in this data?
It will never replace a teacher.
Yeah.
And the insights of a teacher, I think that's for sure. But the hope is that the meshing of the two will provide a more complete picture of what's going on. But for sure, qualitative feedback will remain very, very important.
We were doing some work yesterday in preparation for applying for more grant funding to support ongoing implementation of our math curriculum. So we've had another round of funding that's been approved from the Department of Ed through August, and we're applying for that to continue all of next year. And it's interesting because we were asking educators about that. And in particular, the ones that we talked to yesterday were saying that it was well calibrated to what they were seeing. We have, someone asked earlier about like K grade levels. In K1, we've heard there's variations there. But one of the things that can happen is that teachers can go in and they can adjust that, Michelle, so that you can adjust it so that the MyPath actually adjusts, and teachers can certainly decide to regroup children in different ways. We do it all the time. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Sort of building on that, so much of the curriculum, it sounds like, is also like the differentiation is based on a device, a computer. So how are we ensuring that the students have the skills to be able to interact with that? Or is it something that hasn't been an issue, just sort of coming in with varying levels of digital fluency?
It's a good question. I would say we really haven't seen that as a concern. Teachers haven't surfaced that as a concern. It doesn't seem to require a high level of digital sophistication. And of course, they're having this MyPath, which, as Stephanie was saying, 30 to 40 minutes a week is the goal. And then the teacher is going to the online portal to work with this prerequisites report and know what kinds of learning is needed for different students in the class. But then they're having instruction from the teacher. It's not mostly an online experience.
And I might add that it facilitates, it supports the feedback loop that our teachers build with their students. So it's a part of that, but children are not engaged in a way that they think that's the only way that information is getting generated about them, or that they have feedback about their learning. So, yeah.
I just had another quick question on the teacher. You talked about the consistency or the lack of consistency in the pre-world of this, and I'm just curious, sort of how is that implementation going? And Peter asked about feedback, but I'm also just curious about sort of do you find that the teachers have been embracing this, and just generally curious as to what sort of the feedback you're hearing now that sort of everybody, hopefully everybody across the district is using this.
We do plan to survey teachers before the end of the year, but we've been in buildings a lot and with trainings and just classroom observations and so on. And I would say it's been very favorably received. Some teachers have embraced it more readily than others. And I would say probably the most consistent, not complaint, but concern is it's a lot. It's really a lot to take on. There's a lot to this curriculum. There are many layers of it, and it takes time. And I think that's hard for a lot of people to know. I have to give myself really 2 to 3 years to really feel comfortable with this, rather than just jumping in with the activities I might have been very comfortable doing for a number of years. Yeah.
And an example of that I might share is that in September and October, when we were first administering the diagnostic, not all educators were ready to understand the prerequisite report and how to dig into this. We were in a very different place with professional development, building leader support, math coaching support, to be ready to really dig into that in the middle of the year and learn from the data. And those are the things, so when Mary says it's a lot, there's a lot of resources there too, right? And so it's unpacking all of that and getting into that and making use of that. So.
Ben, did
No,
you? I know that, okay.
You know, I'm a former school teacher, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th grade. And this would have been incredible for me at the time that I was teaching. Data is always helpful because that's something when you're in a classroom and you're dealing with individuals, you're not only looking at the quantitative data that is coming to you as they're performing, but you're also looking at the qualitative data that's available to you in terms of your interaction, which allows you then to make some determination in terms of what path forward you're going to have. One of the things that jumped out to me here on there is this ladder of reading and writing. And
We haven't gotten, they haven't presented that.
whoa, I'm always out of sync, but it's all right. I was
I
always
think-
out of sync as a
yeah.
classroom teacher also, and the principal would jump on me and say, hey, you're out of sync, but then I was always on time. Anyway,
Do you have any more comments on the math,
The
the
math-
iReady math?
you know, one of the things that all data presents as a challenge is that data overload. You're looking at so much data that you get lost in the trees. And you can't see the forest. Teachers are human beings that are same, but the difference with a teacher is they're dealing with a live student in front of them every day. And they have to make sense of that in relationship to that student. So as you implement this over time, the big question for me is, as I said before, is what happens when this ends? What happens when the money runs out? Is it going to continue? Is all that learning going to be go by the wayside? Is there a plan to continue this kind of intensive data collection as regards our students over time, and it doesn't end because the grant ends?
I would defer to
gonna reach
the other
into our
two
pockets
gentlemen
here.
in the room.
So I think any curriculum that we implement in any content area is going to have a lot of resources that need to be front-loaded. And it's also going to have ongoing costs. The reason that a lot of the resources have to be front-loaded is sometimes there's physical materials, manipulatives, things like that. And also the training's more intensive at the front end than it is you expect it to be over time. So I do think that this likely wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for the state grant that supported us, in the same way we've been able to implement this year. Just financially, it would have been very difficult. I think there was a conversation today with building leaders around the long-term sustainability of some of that and how do we wean ourselves off some of those costs over time. And that also means that we've been spending some funds on math materials because we've had a sort of a hodgepodge approach to a certain extent of curriculum, that we need to actually kind of streamline our spending to be consistent with primarily with this program. And so we're starting to have those conversations. You're spot on. It's something that we think about. I know Mary and Stephanie in particular think about it often and talk to me about it often. But any program shouldn't be costing the same amount in year 3 that it does in year 1.
Definitely not.
So that's sort of where we are with that. I don't know if there's anything that you would add or that covers.
No, thank you.
This is an impressive program.
Yes.
I mean, incredibly impressive. My hope is that it outlives the grant, and that the grant plants this seed, and it continues, and that the support that it needs to go on into the future continues. I would hate to see this level of incredible excellence dropped in relationship to instruction because we don't have the funds. It would be tragic.
I'm going to suggest that we continue moving
Okay.
through.
Sure.
We can come back. If we have more questions on iReady, we can come back to those questions. But I think there's more material.
We'll try to be brief. So we just wanted also to give you an update on grade 6. So this is iReady as a K through 5 curriculum. And right now, we're in our second year of the Desmos math curriculum. The 6A1, that's kind of a terrible name, I think, but it means it goes from grade 6 to Algebra 1. And that's also being used in grade 7 and 8 at the middle school. So when 6 does go to ARMS, that'll be nice. It'll be the same curriculum. And this one is one where students do use devices quite a lot. It's basically a digitized version of illustrative math and open up resources, which are two very highly regarded curricula. But it's not all online. I mean, there's paper involved as well, but they're the level of student engagement is very high. Kids love them because it has a lot of animations and can really, these core concepts can really bring them alive in a way that it's difficult to do on paper. So one thing that's been, to me, feels like a little bit of an issue is that the 6th grade teachers, because they're in the elementary buildings, but everyone else is doing iReady. And so, you might have one teacher in the building doing Desmos math. So I've been trying to counter that a little bit by getting together with them twice a month in a professional learning community, just so we can share ideas. And we have a Desmos coach who comes every other time to share insights on what other people are doing. And so that's been very helpful. And our hope is for next year to get Mike Flynn, who's been working so successfully with the middle and high school teachers, to work with the 6th grade Desmos teachers as well. And this was the Open SciEd. So that started in fall 2022. So we're in our second year, and this is just 6th grade. So the 6th grade teachers, I have to give a shout out to the 6th grade teachers. Two major new curricula, basically simultaneously. And this is really, the kids seem really to love this. It's actually the only approved middle school science curriculum. It's phenomena-based, which means like they start with trying to explain something, which is so different from memorizing vocabulary lists or whatever. Like when I went to watch in a classroom they showed this video of a truck pulling up and had speakers on it, high volume, and parked in front of a building, and then the plate glass started to vibrate in the building, and they're saying to the kids, "What's going on here?" And so that was the unit on sound waves, and having them try to explain it and to learn about it. So it's really, really engaging. And the science standards have changed in recent years. It used to be that, for example, in 6th grade, they would study earth sciences all year. And now it has more of a spiraling approach where they do the 3 major categories every year. So that's been a shift as well. But if there are any particular questions about it, but it's really been very well received, this science curriculum. Then we want to talk a little bit about literacy.
Yeah, so Mary and I are really pleased to be able to tell you that with the direction from the superintendent much earlier in the year, work with our district leadership team across the months of this year, that we've been able to consider beginning the exploration of a new K-2 literacy curriculum. So we are aiming for a curriculum that will be both one that provides structured literacy instruction, brain-friendly reading instruction, and language-building curriculum, both for reading and for writing. We've been able this spring to assemble a broad-based literacy review committee of educators, parents, administrators. We've begun meeting, we've started reviewing curricula that meet those kind of parameters, that also fulfill criteria that teachers have helped to develop through some surveys and with the work of the committee. And we hoped by the beginning of June to be able to recommend to the superintendent some curricula that we recommend will be piloted in some of our K-2 classrooms for the year next year. And then come back to the superintendent and to you by early May of 2024, as we did last year for math, to be able to recommend the curricula that we think should be acquired as high-quality instructional material for our K-2 classrooms. The next couple slides, just briefly, in case you have a question about why K2, was just to give you the idea that We know from research, and the graphic on the next slide, Mike, kind of shows that there are about 5 to 10% of all students in classrooms, children who are homeschooled, who are going to learn to read very effortlessly. We are not born with our brains ready to read and to dissect print. We're ready for sounds and speech. But if we think about how this graphic shows that 90 to 95% of our students are really going to benefit, about 55% of them really need a structured literacy approach. That's led us to think about how do we make that possible in a very consistent way in our K-2 literacy curriculum. And the striking thing about research, in addition to this, is that we know that 95% of students in this nation receiving very explicit systematic literacy, structured literacy instruction, even those with indicators of risk for dyslexia will be able to read at or about at grade level by the time they're 8, if that instruction happens in this critical window of ages 5 to 8. And that's what's brought us to beginning with thinking about K-2 literacy, and then moving forward thinking about how we improve our grades 3-5 literacy. We know that for students who are not on that trajectory by by age 8, that they are 4 times more likely to not graduate by the time they're 19 years old. And so this is something important to all of us, and something our educators have been asking for some time. This is something we tried to get underway before COVID hit, and so we're eager to dig into this work together. Yeah, so we're here for questions on any of that.
I don't know whose hand was up first, so Jennifer?
Thanks, this looks really exciting. I'm looking forward to hearing about it. Is our current curriculum lacking in some way?
So it's, our current curriculum has a bit of a saga like our math curriculum, where it's not meeting the needs of all learners. And as a result, educators with everyone's best interest at heart start doing different things. So what happens in one first grade classroom may not be the same thing happening in another first grade classroom. And quite honestly, to no one's fault, we didn't learn to teach reading this way. Even currently in our higher secondary, post-secondary education sites and colleges, pre-service teachers have not learned to teach reading in this way. So our state is just about to put out a mandate that our public colleges and universities will begin teaching for science of reading-based pedagogy and structured literacy. So we're eager to see that improve.
Thank you.
Peter?
Yeah, so building on Jennifer's question, I don't know if you could give us just kind of a snapshot of where this fits in what I'm sure you all follow in your profession is the national conversation of, so the terms are different, but structured literacy versus balanced literacy, or phonics versus context understanding. And as someone who is not an expert in pedagogy, these are just things that I've picked up from having kids go through schools, but there seems to be this, over many years, this kind of pendulum swing back and forth in how you teach reading, which of course is not, a quantitative science yet, do you teach children, and at what age, how to decode sound from letters and then letters and words, phonics, versus giving them more meaning and context clues and semantics. And if I'm reading the research recently correctly, it seems like there's this swing back to phonics, that if you look at a research, the research is supporting this kind of more structured approach. And I don't know if I'm too loosely associating phonics with structured literacy, which is why I wanted to ask you, because it seems like the context of what Jennifer was getting at, which is, I'm sure all of our teachers are doing absolutely the best they can, and the thing that's amazing about teachers is that they dynamically see where a student is and they are form-fitting, so that's amazing, but we want to give them obviously the best tools to work with. So I don't know if you could sort of for a non-expert, put that
Yeah,
in
well,
context.
thanks for that question. We'll try not to keep you here for 4 hours. Our superintendent is very nervous right now. If he slides back to that last slide, just before the question slide, you'll see that, we've been very, very specific that we're looking for structured literacy and language building curriculum. So there's not going to be a dichotomy between the two. And when we first met with the district leadership team, we addressed the fact that there's a lot of misnomers out there about the science of reading, and that it just fits into this narrow category of phonics. That is not the position that is widely subscribed to, and nor is it our position. So we're clearly looking for something that's going to be in a very systematic way with structured literacy, building those word recognition skills, knowing that all children have come to us without hearing impairments. Children have come to us with their brains ready to use those sounds in oral language. So the way we're going to build that oral language is going to maximize how they're ready for language comprehension, to build their background knowledge, their vocabulary, their reading comprehension, be able to use the context. But the kind of reading that's been going on largely, not just in Amherst, but in our schools in general, has been more, look at the word in guess, look at the picture in guess, look at the first letter and what would make sense. That's the way most of us were trained. Even recently, people are being trained that way. And we've just come to realize that it's not the way our brains learn to read. It's interesting, Peter, because this is not new. This research has been around for 50 years, but the way that brain research has picked up on that in the last 5 to 10 years has really added to that. So Louisa Moats, a real guru in this, would actually argue with you. She actually likes to say in professional meetings that it is rocket science.
It's sort of building on that. I've been working now in adult literacy education, and know that that a lot of the adults that come to high school replacement, high school equivalency education, and just basic reading were failed by their K-12 schools, and as you point out, because they failed by third grade, and never were able to catch up, and I'm. Reading some of the same things that Peter was, I can't, because that's my day job too. Hearing about the science of reading and structured literacy, a lot of statistics get cited, and talking about the percentage of fourth graders nationally that can't read, or are reading so much below grade level, and I couldn't find the source, but 30% stands out in my head. And I'm just curious, sort of, it kind of connects to Jennifer's question about how are we doing, right? And what you talked about our vulnerable populations in our district that may, the differences in our students contributing. We're seeing that, but overall, and then also in this specific populations, how are we doing in terms of where do our fourth graders stand in that? Are we seeing more than 30% are able to read at grade level by fourth grade and sixth grade?
We are in our district, slightly above where the state is on that. But we know that those statistics could be a lot better. And again, we have to be very careful about what we're measuring, because what we've been measuring for many years has been based on information that came to us about knowing levels at which children were achieving were somehow, although there was research behind it, there was no evidence-based research behind it. And now we know better. So we're kind of saying, as Maya Angelou said, once you know better, you do better. So.
Interesting, thank you. Mike, and then.
Yeah, and just wanted to add briefly, I think, where Stephanie described the data in our district, I think when you start disaggregating, our data looks a lot worse in many ways. So when we think about, opportunity gaps and educational debt, right, if you were to ask that question slightly differently and ask for some subgroups as opposed to the aggregate, you would see our data looking very similar to national trends.
And that's all, that data is wobbly as you go across districts and cities and towns, et cetera. it's not a perfect kind of science in terms of that analysis. But one of the things that I'm struck by and always is if I'm going to look at a classroom in terms of achievement on any level, the first place I go to look is, what does the bottom look like? If I can understand what the bottom looks like and how that came to be, I can then understand how to get that bottom up to where that top is. I mean, that was my specialty as an elementary school teacher, is taking the bottom and raising that bottom up. Data is really incredibly, really helpful. And again, this data is really good. When I look at the 10 to 15% bottom, the question that I ask is, where is the curriculum in relationship to how it deals with that bottom? Because if I know how that curriculum deals with that bottom, I can very well tell you what's happening at the top.
I think I'll just add on the, because nobody asked questions about the open science, but, and it's not a question other than everything that I've heard, I would love to continue to hear more about that, because I just remember my kid's preschool teacher said that every kid is a scientist, and it's this approach of the phenomena-based learning. It just sounds very much like it's keyed into how young people really like to explore the world and engage with science. So I'm just fascinated by it. So I'm curious how that's. Love to hear more. I don't know if tonight's the night, but
Yeah, we could definitely arrange for a presentation on that for sure. And I always think about the phenomena base, that it's just good training for life, because they're observing something and trying to figure it out, and they have to marshal all their resources in support of that.
Any other questions? Jennifer?
Back on the literacy, I too am not an expert, but I've read that and heard that children being read to, especially at a young age, is a key indicator in helping them learn to read and to write. Do our curricula include, and I always love when I hear about a teacher at any grade like reading a book aloud to a class, like a chapter a day or something like that. Does the curricula include anything structured or formalized or about being read to the students, not just like sitting with learning to read themselves, but being read to?
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's a very valid part of to be asking about, and a very essential part of our curriculum. Because again, think about how we're born. Our brains are not born to read print. Our brains are born to listen to sound. So the more that children are taking in that oral language and processing storybook language and literacy, it's helpful to them. It's building their background knowledge, it's building their vocabulary, and all of that. That will very much continue to be a part of any curriculum that we embrace in this district.
Great, thank you.
Peter?
I'm trying to avoid the 4-hour comment from before. This is really hard, though, because this is really fascinating stuff. We don't get a lot of opportunity at school committee
We do
to.
private sessions, Peter.
Okay. All right, well, we'll be here till 11 then, sure.
No, we won't.
So, on seeking a new K-2 curriculum, how critical that window is, we know that some kids miss that window, right? And we have a really stark example of it with our third graders, right? So right after that K-2 window, and then, and even if we pick an amazing curriculum and it's implemented, not every kid is going to succeed, right? And so, I guess I would hope that as we evaluate new curriculums for K-2, we're at the same time thinking about, are we doing the most effective intervention at 3, 4, 5, and particularly 3, 4, 5, because obviously it's 3 and up, but the longer you wait, as I'm sure you all know, it's exponential, right? The harder it is to catch, because the classic going from learn to read to reading to learn, and so I just hope we don't forget that as well.
We definitely won't. No, but that will be the next part of it. It's been explicitly planned for. But the thinking was that we would build a better foundation for future 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders by starting at K2. Right. But there'll be work even in this summer into the fall for thinking about those students for sure.
And we also know that as we learn more, as our building leaders learn more, as our educators learn more, our reading specialists learn more, that we're going to have this opportunity to help everyone have more foundational understanding of what goes into reading instruction with science of reading pedagogy. So we're particularly thinking about how can we in the short term be improving vocabulary, morphology instruction, comprehension, and all that are going to also influence writing, not just reading, for those upper grades.
I just want to build on that too, the comment about the third grade, going back to your comment about third graders nationally being impacted, and presumably we're seeing the same impact, not just in the math achievement, but also with literacy and reading with our third graders. And I'm just, not for tonight, because I think this is a little off topic, like expanding the topic. So maybe at a future meeting, just understanding sort of what are the interventions we're doing and thinking to sort of bring, because I don't want us to say, and I know you're not, so I'm not trying to put words in my mouth, but it would be a shame for us and a failure, frankly, on our part to use that as an explanation for continued and ongoing sort of dips in performance and accomplishments for that cohort of students. And so it really is our responsibility to bring that cohort in and support them in a way so that we don't see that sort of flowing all the way through till the day they graduate in 12th grade.
Yeah.
So like I said, that's not on topic for tonight, but it is something that I think seeing that math data sort of brings that to mind, is like, what are we doing overall? Irv?
You know, third grade is a transitional grade, the transitional grade. Put on your big boy pants and girls. That's the grade. And looking at that, when you start putting third, fourth, and fifth there, and looking at that data across those three grades, it's sort of fascinating to me. And the other thing that I always think about is that there are, because I'm old school, I was brought up in terms, one of my favorite reading mentors was Gattano in Words and Color. And how that impacted me. But also, what was more impactful was how, when you're dealing with kids, that there's more than one intelligence. There's just more than one, and it would come through. I mean, when a kid comes up to you, you're teaching a kid, and you're just not getting it, and you start looking at it, try to figure out what's going on. I mean, that kid, that student, might just be a student who takes in more information in a much better fashion just by listening, not by seeing. And that's why I want to look at all curriculums. And this is just not, I'm an educator at heart. I mean, down to my very toes, but, you know, when I hear the way that this is taking shape here and the data that you have, I guess I'm just overjoyed at it. I would just want to say that the teacher is the primary implementer of this. And if the teacher fails to understand the human reaction and looking at that data and how that is formed, that it fails. But I really applaud what you're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I know you're recognizing this, but we'd leave you with that praise for our educators, our math coaches, our building leaders, our superintendent who's helped to lead this work, and curriculum associates who brings us iReady, because their professional development has been really special and very, very, very detailed and very specific for our district, and will continue that way next year. So that data comes to you because of the good work of all of those people on behalf of our students.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
There's.
Good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So moving on to our next item is charter and choice out student retention analysis. Mike?
We had a similar conversation in a different district Tuesday night. From my perspective, and I'm not trying to just fast forward this, but I think the same kind of dialogue that we had applies to this district as well. And, you know, for us, certainly from a data perspective, we want to separate it out between the districts, and the approach, I don't think, would be significantly different. So, you know, I don't want to be flip, but I also, unless there's a need to, I wouldn't undo any of the conversation we had on Tuesday
Right.
night, and I feel like it relates to this one as well, this district as well.
I would agree. Jennifer?
Yeah, I totally agree. But just to summarize for people who maybe
Yeah,
didn't watch on
absolutely.
Tuesday. So it's something that you're going to work on over the summer?
Yeah, I can do that. I just
oh,
wanted
okay,
to,
yeah,
yeah,
sure,
yeah,
go
yeah.
ahead.
But I just wanted to like check with the
Shut you
committee's
up.
Yes.
Excellent.
feelings, whether a summary would be appropriate or we want to dig in the same way we did on Tuesday.
A summary.
Sure. So a summary would be that we are going to dig in over the summer. We have some interns in particular who can do a lot of this work. And actually, someone stopped me today at an event I was at and said, "Oh, I saw that at the school committee. I really would want to be in a focus group," because one of the pieces was the interest in collecting data that's similar to 6-7 years ago, but also including more focus groups and opportunities for two-way dialogue. Along with that, and trying to look at those lists of students and families and reach out so we can gather more information, I think with a more intentional focus as opposed to last time on that student retention piece with more of an action plan. There was a discussion on Tuesday night about, you know, assigning resources to this, that it can't just be kind of the existing people doing this additional work, that this really does require resources. And we've actually started brainstorming this week at a district level about what that might look like. So I think that's the quick summary. I'm happy to go deeper, or, you know, if I calibrated that wrong, just let me know.
The only thing I would add that's probably a little different for this district than the other one is thinking, because kindergarten is where most of our students are coming in, and I mean, other than people moving into the district. So I think, you know, it's not as much people leaving the district, right? But more sort of general town, looking at people, families in the town with students of a certain age, right? And understanding. So it's broader than just looking at the students that we've known and who have left, right? So,
Absolutely.
Peter?
Yeah, so I like the multifaceted approach. I mean, so you mentioned, you know, working with some interns to do some analysis and doing some focus groups, and then brainstorming FTE. I think that's good. I think it would also help to just think about how do we structure it, right? Like because I would really appreciate, it would be great to have a meeting in, you know, September, October where, oh, this is what the focus groups did, or this is what the intern presented. But that to me is not the, that's not the endpoint deliverable. To me, the endpoint deliverable is sort of collectively, I mean, you and the school committees, deciding, you know, what do we want to have happen here at the end of the day, and then working towards that. And I'm not saying we all have to figure that out now, but I would just like to sort of scope what the end game is in terms of a structure. I mean, I won't go into everything else I said last time because we're in the spirit of summary. But my hope is that we do something a lot more structured. And if we do that, or if we start to do that earlier rather than later, then we have to think about how do we fund that in FY24, right? Which with the budget that we've already passed, or that we've already submitted to the town. And so how could we possibly fund that? So yeah, I mean, I would be interested in, you know, if you have brainstorm desire to kind of think about how we can structure that offline. I'm very motivated to kind of move this kind of topic forward. So I appreciate your continued attention to it.
Thank you.
Moving on then to our next item, which is the third quarter FY23 budget update.
I have to say, not as interesting, not necessarily less important, but certainly not as interesting as that conversation on new curricula and its implementation. But nonetheless, it's still a pretty important piece of what you guys do as a school committee to kind of keep an eye on these things, and hopefully we're leveraging the resources that we have to affect the education in a positive way as best we can. As far as the third quarter, I'll start with the most important point that I have about this for the Amherst budget, and that is that we're doing fine. That we're on, we're pretty much on budget where we want to be, and we're in good shape as we head through the year and into this fourth quarter. There are a couple areas that are cautionary and need some support, but we have some resources to kind of provide that support. So we have some other areas of the budget that are doing well and can yield some resource to support those areas that are over budget. Excuse me. I'll start at the top with the payroll and salaries. We're in good shape there, and if anything, just a little under budget. There's a variety of reasons for that, which I articulate in the memo to you guys. But again, that'll create some resource that we can leverage to help us out in some other areas. And some of the reason why we're either over budget or stressing our budget is because of changes in staffing or not being able to hire certain people, so we have to contract those services. And so we sort of we're still getting the work done. It's just a matter of where we're spending the money to do that is in a different place. And so that's what you see, and I gave an example in the text there about the position in facilities around plumbing. We've had some needs around plumbing, and so we've had to contract that work. That's part of why we're above budget in regard to that. And so as we head in the fourth quarter, certainly with our English language education and our facilities, we're going to need to provide some additional support there. Fortunately, for the percentages that are in both those categories, the raw dollars that we need to find to help out and support those is pretty modest. So that's beneficial in regard to the budget. It's not too hard to cover a gap, when the overall raw dollars are not large. We've had a higher level of translation need in English language education. That's part of why we've got ourselves over budget. You'll also notice about $9,600 in encumbrance there, so that's a projected need for the rest of the year. We may not need to realize all that, so that is a circumstance where we may not have to leverage all that we've projected, and that may help mitigate that overage as well. The other area that we're going to keep a close eye on and is likely going to need additional support is in special education. And again, there's some staffing challenges we've had, and so in that regard, we're meeting the needs of the students and having to contract out some of that work. And I think the other thing I would say there is a similar thing that I said a couple nights ago at a different district meeting, and that is that there are the numbers, kinds, and acuity of need for students is greater, even though the pandemic's sort of winding down, hopefully. But nonetheless, the needs are there and have presented themselves in ways that we have to respond to and are compelled to respond to, both legally and morally. But nonetheless, that's putting pressure on our budget in that area. And so we're in the fortunate circumstance that even though that's happened to our budget, we do have the resources in some other areas to help cover that cost. So again, I'll come back to my original point, which is just that, in the overall, in the main, we're in good shape as we head through the third quarter and into the fourth, and I think we'll finish our year on budget and have the resources to do the things we need to do to finish the year out strong for the kids. And I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Questions? Peter?
Thank you for that. In terms of actual dollars, this is one of the nicer columns of green and red and yellow that I've seen. I'm just thinking back several years ago. So this is nice. Can you explain the 0% of the 70K spent on food service and the 4.3% of the 104K-ish spent on program development other? Is that because we're not anticipating needing those funds, or we anticipate a lot of fourth quarter spending on those two lines?
So I'd say in the food service, we often make the decision sort of late in the year as to how much support we actually need to provide to food service to sort of meet its need. I will say that over the last couple of years, we had the opportunity to build in the main, the food services is kept in sort of its own fund, its own separate from the general fund. It's in its own operating fund of sorts. And so we've been cautious and conservative with that and tried to build reserves there to accommodate any unforeseen needs in that. And so it's in a pretty strong position. There is, recommendations from the state about how much you should have sort of cash on hand in that regard. So we may be in a place where we're not needing as much of that. The other thing is that with the increases in support for, free meals to all students, as well as a higher level of participation, that helps the finances of our food service program as well. And while there have been some increases in costs of food, again, a large amount of the purchasing we do are through supported programs, so the inflation hasn't impacted those quite as severely. So we'll see whether or not we need the food service support, or whether we need all of it. We'll probably need some of it, but whether we'll need all of it. So that again helps us, because then we can support some other areas. I think in the program development and other, less of a, I think there's some things we anticipated to spend there, and we haven't yet. And I think that one of the pieces actually relates to the conversation we just had, is that there are some curriculum materials that we're getting ready to purchase, that we were anticipating and haven't yet made purchases. So we'll probably see a fairly decent amount of spending in that area as we finish out the year.
Thank you.
I have a question about the budget frost and the use of ESSER funds. So we, several months ago, I can't remember exactly when, you implemented a budget frost to try to preserve some of the funding from this year, so that we, for the use of ESSER funds, so that we would have more for next year. So I'm just curious, because it doesn't show up on this
Right.
on this grid, because this is just the general funds.
Right.
And I'm saying this out loud for also for people at home watching. So how is that going, and have we been able to sort of save some of those ESSER funds as expected?
The short answer is yes. So I think it's had its intended effect, and so that's part of why our budget's sitting in the place it is at the moment, which gives us the ability to sort of finish the year strong, and particularly in the sort of expense account area. So people have been a little more conscientious of their spending. Not that they're cavalier by any means normally, but a little more conscientious and careful about their choices and that sort of thing. And so I think they'll be able to finish out the year. And certainly what we've done in the frost circumstances, anything that they needed to provide, instruction to kids is a yes, we're going to do that. It's in the more discretionary areas, like, do we really need to replace that office chair this year, right now? It would be nice to, but do we have to? And people are being, and yet we're still buying those things. And so if it's really a need, we'll still buy it. And I think we have the ability through the last quarter to relax that maybe just a smidge and finish out the year strong. And I think the other thing on the ESSER, a lot of what we had was salaries. Some of that will show up more pronounced in the salaries area, because what we'll do is we'll shift that expense back into this part of the budget. And so see a little bit more of that as, if I were to give you this report, in the beginning of June, where we made those transactional sort of changes, you'd see it a little more pronounced. Those haven't all been reflected here in that salary section, which is where you would see that. Mm-hmm. So you'll see a little bit more of it on this kind of report as we get closer to the end of the year, and when I come back to you to talk about, well, we need to move this much into this department or that department or these different areas, we'll see that a little more pronounced. But I think in the short story is that, yes, it's worked, and we will be preserving some more ESSER monies that'll help us out as far as next year's budget.
Okay. And I just have one final. Did you have a question? No. I just want to, because you started by saying that we're in good shape, and I just want to clarify that our implementation of this budget is in good shape. Right. I think because when people hear that's a reflection of how well you and the district and building staff are doing in terms of managing their expenses to this budget and not overspending sort of what we have, or like you just described, delaying spending as necessary. That's by no means a reflection on sort of the future in terms of how challenging our budget year might be. We can have a challenging budget, but then do a really fantastic job managing within that once we're getting to the point that we're spending and implementing.
Right, and yeah, when I say we're doing well, it's relative to the budget we have. Whether that totality of available resources is what we really would like to have and would need to have, and is a different question, like you said.
Yeah. Any other? Next up, we have preschool fees, and I believe that's you also, Doug.
That's me also, and I was noting on the agenda, it said 15 minutes. I thought, wow, that's hopefully not going to take anywhere near that long. This is fairly brief, I think, in that we regularly revisit the fees we charge for various things that we do. We don't have a ton of programs that we do that. At some point, we may come back to you with like school lunch fees. In other districts, they have some other things. But the preschool, we haven't adjusted that in a while. Since fiscal 20, we felt it was time to review that and to adjust those fees, partly because of inflationary factors. We use the resources that we gather, the tuitions that we charge to help support the program. So the kinds of things the preschool needs, whether it's additional equipment or materials, snacks, laundry service, there's things that have to get washed, those sort of things. Those are all part and parcel of what this tuition helps to cover. We hadn't adjusted it in a couple of years. We were at $5.75 per hour, which was, we looked at a number of area preschools like ours, and quite frankly, some of them are charging $7 or $7.50 an hour. We didn't feel we could make that big a jump in one fell swoop, so that's part of why we went to $6.50 for this year. We'll review this again next year and probably come back to you with, again, a slight adjustment to this. The other thing I'll express is that as you look at this, and it's a pretty complex chart on the next page, but what it does is it takes into account, we've done this for a number of years, the state median income. That's what SMI stands for. And we use percentages of that state median income at the various size families to sort of set a gradated tuition charge. And then, of course, depending on, there's sort of two different versions of preschool. You can do a 24-hour, it's not one class that runs all day and all night. It's 24 hours in the week. So, that's a longer day, and then they have the 14-hour, which is, again, over the course of the week, 14 hours, and then we have 35 weeks, and so that's how we get those sort of tuition levels, and then we adjust them down as people's income levels are, in various gradations of the state median income. So it's about understanding the economic resources people have available and their ability to pay, and trying to accommodate that in a reasonable way, and yet still, generate a little revenue to run the program. So I'm happy to answer any questions about that.
Jennifer?
So this is the first time I've looked at this chart, or for this meeting. So help me with how to read this chart. So let's say I'm a family of 4, and our income is 90% of the state median. Where am I? What does that mean for me?
So if you're a family of 4, that's column A4.
Yep.
And you said you're at 90%?
Yeah, it's just
So that means you're making in, your monthly income would be between $9,630 and $11,328. So that would be, wherever, 90% falls almost in the middle of that. Or
Yep.
a little more to the 9, so probably about $10,000 a month is about where you are as far as your income. If that's your income, then, in the two right-hand columns, $40.95 or $23.89, depending on which one you are participating in, is your tuition.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Perfect. Thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah. And the state adjusts the state median income, and they have a standard, and I think we referenced it at the top about where they publish that number that we, then use.
Can I just, building on that, is that the second chart on that, is that just a duplicate of the one above it?
The second
Or is-
row, it's the family size gets larger. So it goes
Larger.
family
Oh,
of
okay.
7, family of 8, family of 9, and
Got it.
much,
Thank
much
you.
larger families.
Didn't notice that.
I know, I'm
Or-
not here. This is just, Doug, what is the difference between the state AMI, the area AMI, and the local AMI? Is there any difference?
There are some, I haven't looked at the local ones lately. The state one, if you sort of do the math, I mean, and take, family of 2, and you take that 100%, that's $7,704 per month. That's $92,000 a year if you annualize that. Just to give you, I think more often people think in terms of annual salaries or annual incomes as opposed to monthly. So I think that gives you the range there. So on a statewide level, the state median income might run a little high relative to Western Mass. You think about, inside of $495, people make a lot more money housing's a lot more expensive. There's all of that sort of stuff. We get out here in Western Mass, it's a little lower. And typically the group that we get, we're typically a suburban part of Springfield, so we get lumped in with Springfield as part of that, which sometimes creates a higher median income for us as well, but still it's lower than Eastern Mass. But that's part of why I think that we've used that median income and then fractions of that median income and have the number of levels that we have is to provide, quite frankly, a little more support for people because we're using that state median income number. We could use a different one if the committee feels like we should look at the other kinds of averages and medians that are there.
Yeah, for instance, the FHA uses area median income. They don't use state median income. It's just just interesting to me that there's a state median income and there's an area median income, and some programs rely upon the area median income, but not the state median income.
Right. And I think that an example of that, like Section 8 housing and some of that
Yes.
uses a much more regional median income, I think in order to sort of parallel the housing costs, right? And that may be a more appropriate, and I'm certainly happy to look into other options around that. This is what we've classically used. We sort of rolled it forward, but I'm happy to look at those and see.
Just in terms of our programs
Right.
for lunches and all this, and now lunches doesn't matter anymore because it's all thing, but
Right.
it does make a difference and could make a difference in terms of what we're using, as opposed to, if we're using area, that's one number, if we're using state, that's another number. Anyway.
Peter?
Two-part question. First one's very short. Did you come up with this chart, or was this based on a template that DESI provides? Or?
I don't think it's a template that DESI
Okay.
provides. It is one that it may even predate my predecessor. It may go all the way back to Rob Detweiler or someone previous to that. We've had this structure for quite a while, so I kept on keeping on as it were.
It's okay to follow up.
Yes.
So I'm okay with updating the rate as proposed. I do think, though, especially what you said, that we haven't looked at this in a while, it would be good to do a refresh on what kind of structure we want to provide. Because how you structure the values and how steep you make the grade can come out to the same cost for the district, but result in different burdens for different families of different incomes. So for example, I'm looking at a family of four at the 26 to 35% level. So family of four, you could be making less than $3,000 a month, and you're not yet at free preschool. So that to me is like an open question. Like, should that, at what point, does it make sense, for example, or is it a judgment call of, do we bring that zero up further, but then make it steeper up, so that like at the very top levels of it, and do we expand these grades? So if you're at 110%, maybe that's where you pay full, and then you bring it down, right? And I'm basically just saying, I'm not proposing one for tonight, but there's a lot of different ways to add or subtract rows here, and to steepen or change the grade of the curve that would have the same financial impact on the district. So I think that would be an interesting topic for a future school committee meeting, to say how we want to arrange those. Because it's just my 2 cents, is I would, some of these rows, even though it's still a very it's a relatively nominal fee for the annual tuition. In an ideal world, I would like to see that free tuition be at a higher level, that more people could benefit from that.
Right, and I think the other thing, along those lines is that, we're talking about median income, so we're saying if you're at the median income or above that, you're capable of paying a full tuition. And I think that's the sort of fundamental first question is like, what is it that, if you look at other kinds of housing, sometimes it may be based on median income, but it'll be if you're between 80 and 135% of median income. So do we make the full expense group be much higher than median income as a place to start, and then sort of, like you say, sort of change how much discount as we go through the grid.
Any other questions? Jennifer?
So you're going from 575 to 650 an hour, which doesn't sound like a big change, but it's a 13% increase. And I see that you're saying we haven't had an increase since fiscal 20, so this would be for fiscal 24?
Correct.
Yeah, so that's 13% over 4 years is like, is as if we had done 3% a year, roughly. So that, a 13% increase feels big, but like if we haven't had one for 4 years, it feels less big. Is there a typical percent increase that we've done in the past?
I think generally what we would do is look at sort of what's the sort of rate of inflation, or sort of what the typical, which is usually 2 to 3% is kind of the neighborhood of where we go. And of course, we're aware of, the current rates of inflation are much higher than that of late. But the other thing I think to reflect on a little bit is that, and not to say that, minimum wage is necessarily the best indicator, but, in Massachusetts, minimum wage has gone up over the last several years significantly to get to the $15 level, which it is at now. And even the most recent increase in minimum wage was about an 8% increase over the previous minimum wage, and it only went up 50 cents. So, there is that sort of from the bottom side of things in minimum wage, some significant increases to folks' income. I'm not saying that's a living wage. I'm not saying anything along those lines, but just saying that yeah, this is as a percentage. And we had that debate when we were talking about, like, what do we set this at and where do we go? And where do we fit in the market? Because there are other preschools around, and how do we compare? And that and then what do we need to generate from a resource standpoint to kind of continue the program? So we're trying to weigh all those factors simultaneously. And I think as we move forward, in the next few years, we'll probably stay at much more modest levels of increase that are much more in line with sort of inflationary sort of increases, and again, trying to stay. I wouldn't say competitive in the market, because it's not like we're in direct competition with other public preschools, but nonetheless, sort of not, setting ourselves in a place where we're way more expensive than our neighbors. And we want to try to provide a good preschool experience and a competitive price-wise, but also just a quality program. And so we try to strike the right balance between those two things.
Thanks.
Just,
Irv?
it's not a trivial matter to understand and know how we choose to define what we're going to base these numbers on, whether it's going to be state, local, or federal, because there are some differences there that will make a really big difference in terms of how you price this. So the question is, how do you determine which one of those that you're going to choose to be able to do this?
No,
Mike?
I wasn't trying to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So, I think a couple things, and I think I'll perhaps be more explicit, but on Doug's theme, is that our preschool has a revolving account, but we need funds in that account to pay teachers. It's not part of our K-12 public schools, which obviously we don't charge for people to come. So I think, it's an interesting conversation, and I truly mean this, about where we cut those lines and how that plays out. This is well below what quote unquote market rate. So if you have a little kid now, you see these numbers, and even the full pay for families is really attractive, and they're sort of subsidizing it so that families who don't pay. I think it's also worth noting that students with special needs who qualify for the preschool, it's completely free for. So we do get funds from the state for those students, but the subsidizing piece is a real one. And I'm very comfortable, Doug maybe less so, but if we want to come back in the 9th so that you all can have more time to think about this, that's, I think some families are wanting to know what the price is, and that's the conflict. But I think it's also less than 2 weeks from now, and that's okay. But I think in terms of sort of how we set it, and we could set it to however we want, but at the end of the day, we still have to balance the books. Right. It's, as opposed to other parts of our budget where we're talking about balancing books at a broad level. This is balancing the books at a very, very local level. So, I think we're open to figuring out how we do that and taking committee feedback on that. But just for the public who are watching, they might say, well, why are we charging at all? And the reason is it's not fully supported in terms of the funding we get from the state. And, it's a tricky balance because, as Doug was indicating, we want to balance affordability with program quality, and unlike some of our other areas where we don't charge, there's a really direct connection between those two in case of our preschool. I know you all know that, but I think it more for the public. I just want them to know why we're talking about this in the way that we are, is the preschool functions fiscally very separately from our K-6 education.
Understood. I just wanted to make sure that we have a defensible position that, hey, well, why are you choosing, state versus local versus federal AMI? And are you choosing it based on your need to generate revenue versus what would be logical under the circumstances? I'm only asking that question because I don't want, someone out there looking at you and say, whoa, what is this? And comes back and asks the question, then all of a sudden we're under a microscope.
Right. Understood, and I certainly appreciate that point of view, and I think that, Department of Early Education and Care, so EEC, I think they put out the state median income, so I think they sort of predispose us to thinking in those terms of using the state number, because I think that that's a metric that they have available and make available to programs like this. At the same time, that doesn't mean it necessarily have to do it that way. We could use it, like you say, use the area median income as a because we feel like it's much more indicative of real incomes in our of our
Yes.
clientele, as it were.
Correct. All right.
Do folks, did you, go ahead.
So, I mean, I guess if you're saying there's not a rush to do this tonight and that we could do it in a couple of weeks, maybe it makes sense to wait a couple of weeks to look at it. A couple things you said, in terms of like, I think the fact that our rate is so, as you're saying, is notably below market, and the anecdote I've heard for the last 15 years since I've been in town is that, comparably speaking, our preschool is head and shoulders above a typical, what people call preschool, but is often just daycare. And the quality and experience that you get at our preschool is exceptional. And I'm not just saying that because I'm on our school committee, but so if you have like a really high quality service that's really below market, that to me suggests even further that maybe we should be making this rate even higher, and then really deeply discounting the bottom income, right? So that, like, if you can afford it and you're already getting a great deal for a top quality service, then you should be paying a decent rate for it. And then that can subsidize, if you will, those who are less able to afford it. I don't know how that translates into a spreadsheet at the moment, which is why I say maybe wait a couple of weeks, but.
I think that's a good suggestion because there's a lot of conversation. Did you?
Yeah, I just want to respond briefly, and I'm fine waiting. I just think it's late April, and I'm not pushing for a vote tonight. I think the goal that I'm hearing, I agree with, but there's real families, and a large increase and a shift could make a large difference on families. So I think that goal might be better realized over time than in a one-year swoop, right? So that it doesn't have a detrimental impact or force families to perhaps look for other options. We want them to stay, like current families.
Mm-hmm.
So, to me, it's almost like that's an admirable end that I think we would all, agree with. I mean, from the district end, I'm not speaking for the committee, but I think you'd want to think about how do we do that over time, not how do we try to do that for next year when people have sort of already committed to our preschool. So I don't mind the waiting, the 12 days, but I think if we're going to make radical changes in pricing structure and all those pieces, I think we'd want to, sort of gradate that and have that play out over a couple years instead of in May 9th when families are committed already. I just want to be sensitive to that. Even if they have capacity, I don't know. I just think that's a good longitudinal goal instead of a 1 year. And I'm not suggesting you were saying it's 1 year, but I just want to say that out loud.
Yeah.
So are we, I'm just going to look around. Do we want to vote tonight or do we want to come back at our next meeting? Just head nods or
I definitely would like to postpone.
postpone? Okay. So
So my question then to the committee is then sort of what would you like to see?
Right, I was going to ask that next. Given what Mike has just said, how do we want to, what adjustments or other alternatives, not just adjustments, but alternatives do we want to see versus what's presented tonight?
You know,
Irv?
you're right, Mike. I mean, there are families out there dancing on the wire all the time with these costs, and they really need to know. And so we owe it to them to give it a really our considerable thought before we make a decision. And frankly, I don't have enough information to do that because there are some things I want to look at, and I'm mindful of the people that I know who any increase is sometimes catastrophic. So
Exactly.
anyway.
If I could just add just a little context of this. So our director of the program has been asking me about this for probably a month and a half, and part of it's timing of budgets and being able to get it onto agendas and that sort of thing. And I know that, but she has shared this with families that are interested. And so this is, what we have in front of us tonight is something that's been in front of people who have been asking questions. And so I think quite frankly, the only direction we could go is down for price. So that would be the one thing I would say is just a general caveat there. That would be, because I think to set it higher at this point, or to change the metric in a way that would increase for any of the sort of current grid members, because, families are starting to bank on that and expect that. That's not to say we can't still make some adjustments and factor that into and talk more explicitly. I mean, the director's having explicit conversation with individual families, so she would know whether or not if we made some change that maybe negatively impacted someone, they might be fine with that. And I think that there's also some discretionary latitude that they bring to bear on these tuitions as well. In circumstances, because circumstances change during the course of the year, and so it's like, oh yeah, we set this and this is what your tuition was, and then things happen and we do adjust accordingly, I guess is what I would say there in that regard, as far as being mindful of people's circumstances. So we have a general policy of being very flexible with people, and if they communicate with us around their need, then we work with them on that.
So I guess my question is, what further information do we need in order to be able to get to a decision? Jennifer?
I would be okay voting on this tonight after hearing what Doug said, and then maybe starting a subcommittee to look at our sliding fee scale, and to maybe take a year to study what other districts do, to look at what the marketplace looks like. And I would even love to see us add like percentages over 100, because if you're making the median income, that's not a lot. And so maybe we add 120% a tier. I don't know, just like if our goal is that families that have lower income pay less, that's great. And then also families that make higher income should pay more, which you do have here, but it's capped at 100%. But if you're at 100% of the median, that's not a lot. So I would love to take all that into consideration and think about doing, if we haven't changed this table in years, maybe it's time to think about updating the structure or having some sort of a little bit of a different or updated structure.
Sounds good. Peter?
I agree with everything Jennifer said, given what Doug has said about families already seeing this, and that we can't really go up responsibly having presented it. I would, on the one hand, we've had this discussion, so usually it's like, oh, we've had this discussion, we should just wait. And then I pause and think, okay, well, what else do we want? There isn't any other additional information, and I would be making the same decision. So I'm comfortable voting it tonight.
Then I move that the fees for preschool tuition for FY24 be set on a sliding scale as presented in the Finance Director's memo of 4/27/2023.
Second.
Moved and seconded, and now we'll take a vote. All those in favor? Sorry, it's hard to see. And all those against?
I abstain.
And abstained. The motion passes 4-0 with one abstention.
Thank
And thank you, Doug.
Thanks, Doug.
We're exactly on time.
I gotta not do that. Yeah. 2 meetings in a week, right? That's the moral of the story.
Right. School building project update.
I'm so excited that I almost fell off my chair. The yesterday morning was a really exciting moment. I want to thank Representative Dom, Senator Comerford, who was literally driving to Boston and following along on her phone, but did make comments via that method with the MSBA Board of Directors meeting, and there was a unanimous vote of the board to support the project scope and budget agreement, or allow the executive director technically to fulfill that, which means the neighborhood of $40 million was committed from the MSBA towards this project. And so that was exciting. I think the thing I shared at the meeting, which I think I want to share here, I was thinking the MSBA, but I actually want to thank everyone in the community and the committee and school building committee, is that thanks for hanging with us. It took a lot of patience for state agencies, for the community. We've been in this for 10 years now. Literally got in 2013, I think November, December of 2013. So it's been a long time coming. So it was a really exciting moment, and as well as the design team and folks like that. So there's an election next week. I happen to be at town hall for the proclamation today, and today there was the end of early voting, and someone told me that early voting, at least the numbers were, there was a lot of people in for early voting. So I think whatever the outcome is, I'm glad that the participation to date has been high, from what I was told. But it is the last hurdle before the results of the town election was the MSBA. Typically, there's not a lot of conversation at the board of directors. There actually was on a different project that afternoon. There was some questions about affordability and community ability to pay for a different project, or willingness to pay, not ability to pay, willingness to pay. So the fact that ours was smooth sailing says a tremendous amount, and I want to thank the school committee, school building committee, Kathy Shane, who's the chair of the building committee, but Paul Bachman was there, Kathy was there. We had some community members, I believe, there as well. It was like 100 people on the list, so I scanned, but then got a little dizzy on the Zoom. It's just a really exciting update, and when we meet next time, hopefully we'll have clarity, hopefully no hanging chads or anything like that, with the direction moving forward. And that's what I shared with our leadership team today, because I'm trying to be very cautious in my public role. I think it's no surprise that I'm really excited about this project, but it's also the case that we've been hanging in limbo for a while about a direction, and having some directionality next week is really important. So, I thank everyone in the town council who's formally endorsed the project as well. So, I'll be keeping my fingers crossed on Tuesday. I'll actually be at a Pelham School Committee meeting, but after that, I'll be keeping my fingers crossed. But just really, really appreciate the support of MSBA. It's not that often that, the timeline of starting a project, the project failing, getting back in was and then how this project has flows, for everyone to meet on timeline was good. Actually, went back to a slide deck I did, a very lengthy slide deck that I did not put in this deck because it's long ago, but after the prior project failed, and just sort of like timing things out, and I think we're doing, the community that is, about as well as possible from the end of that failed vote to where we are today. So that's, I think, my update.
Thank you. Any questions? Peter?
Yeah, it's amazing to me how short these items are at these, moments that have been worked at for many years, and the number of people that were in the room for 5, 6, 7 years ago when things were much more up in the air. There's so many people to thank. We can't fit it all into what it would be. The mother of all Emmy Award people. So many people work tirelessly. I was. I just wanted to put a fine point on one of the more pivotal moments was, 4.5 years ago, we got back our statement of interest when we had reapplied after the last building project failed, and it was not accepted, and we didn't know what we were going to do at that point. And it was I wouldn't say it was a dark time, but it was a very concerning time, because there was no community understanding of what the path forward was. And it was really difficult to see how we were going to replace two buildings, that both of which had to be replaced, and do it in a way that could be afforded. And you came back to the school committee, Dr. Morris, with a proposal for consensus, and you made this great video on Amherst Media that I'm sure you are very proud of the production value of. And you showed up for all these community engagement forums, and you presented a very practical solution of how to bridge the gap of a lot of the more divisive attributes of the previous project. And for one school of a certain size, K to 5 or K to 6, with both schools being replaced at the same time, and it was a really great moment, I think, for the town, because so many people came to those forums and gave us feedback, and a lot of it was, this isn't my ideal, this isn't what I would have preferred, but this is something I can get behind, and it was a real and then that statement of interest is what was accepted and has led us here, and that I think we owe you a lot of gratitude for that. I think you have been an exceptional leader throughout this entire process, and that was just one of the shining moments, I think, that you showed true leadership for the community and did a lot of good for our public schools. So just wanted to thank you for that.
Thank you, Peter.
+1. There's no other comments or questions? We'll move on.
Could I just say one
Yeah,
other
sure.
thing? I also think, Peter's comment got me thinking, I also want to thank those of you who are on the committee then or on the committee now. There's a lot of work that was done by the committee as well. The town council was really new. I'm just I'm thinking back to being in the Bang Center downstairs. I don't know why that one stands out to me, but it does. The committee took a big risk in trusting me to make those presentations. I think community-wide, we took a risk, and we had outside facilitators who did a really good job, but that could have went really badly. But I think there's a lot that I think, when I think about it, that we all learned through that process about how to engage the community on controversial issues. And I think I also want to note that there was, and some people on this committee now were on an enrollment working group that also followed the failed project. And while not always smooth, I think a lot of really good things. Commandantez was one of the offshoots of that. But some of the conversation we had about tonight about charter choice out students is part of that. But it also got folks who were in different places on a prior project in the same room talking, and that was challenging, right? I don't want to pretend that there were only happy moments and everyone took a group photo with all smiles. That's not how I experienced it. And it still mattered that we had people who had some firm disagreements in the same space to try to work to improve the district. And that's really a testament to the community as well, because no one had to come. I mean, maybe me, but the community didn't have to come to do those things. And so, often folks in Amherst, and I'm one of them, we can sometimes talk about critique ourselves and the community, but that was a place where people stepped up and tried to make the best of a very, very difficult situation. So just my appreciation to the larger community as well.
Yep. Irv?
I was on that last, and that's still a very painful memory for me. But one of the good things that came out of it, as far as I'm concerned, is that we got the Charter Commission. The charter, if that would not have failed, we would still be having town meeting. It was only the failure of that galvanized a huge segment of the community to come forward, to bring forward the Charter Commission, which led to the town council and the demise of town meeting.
So I'm going to bring us back onto the
Sorry if
school
I
building
started
project.
going, yeah.
You guys did it, man. You brought me here.
Great. If there's no other comments, so hopefully we'll be coming back on future agenda planning, coming back on May 9th with
Oh, you have it?
reason to celebrate.
There's no doubt about it.
Where did it go? I had it.
I have it up if you'd like me to share.
Oh, sure.
So I have class size policy, to come back to that. School improvement presentations by at least 2 schools, maybe 3. School building project update, and superintendent evaluation. So those are the things I have, which is, that's a pretty healthy agenda. Because
That's
if you
good.
remember, those of you who have seen school improvement plan, those, much like tonight's conversation about curriculum, I think it'll be highly engaging. And one of the opportunities our school committee, has to really get into what's happening on the ground, which we always try to figure out, and sometimes we end up in conversations because of the nature of the work that we're talking about, these broader things.
Right.
So, I mean, I think if there's things to add, I would just caution us about maybe replacing things instead of adding things, because I think that already looks like a pretty lengthy meeting.
Right, and just to, the three chairs are meeting on Monday with Mike to talk through the schedule and planning all the three evaluations out. So that, that topic may be one that is really just it might even be something that we just have in the chair's update is here's the schedule, because I think we had originally in the first June meeting was when we would have the instrument and well, tentatively. So I'm just saying that depending on sort of what the decisions are made at that meeting, that might be one that changes. I think that's it. And then we have, right now we have 2 more meetings after May. The final one in June would be the vote on the superintendent evaluation, as well as an open conversation about guidance for the goals for next year, so that while it's all fresh in our minds and before we tune out for the summer, we have that discussion and then go in so that we can hit the ground running when we come back in the fall. And so right now, the other June meeting is on the 13th. And that's it. And now for warrants, I do have a couple. I, Allison McDonald, authorized by my signature a transfer request in the amount of $1,725 for a transfer dated April 11th, 2023, and I signed that on April 13th, 2023. I, Allison McDonald, authorized payroll in the amount of $748,041.80 dated April 19th, 2023, and I signed that on April 19th, 2023. I, Allison McDonald, authorize a transfer request in the amount of $471.70 for a transfer dated April 19th, 2023, and I signed that on April 19th, 2023, and this one was for Fort River. And I authorized by my signature a transfer request in the amount of $22,400 for a Crocker Farm transfer dated April 20th, 2023, and I signed that on April 21st, 2023. One more. I, Allison McDonald, authorized by my signature payables in the amount of $410,953.08 for a warrant dated April 14th, 2023. That includes general fund expenses of $190,318.38, revolving fund expenses of $38,061.86, grant fund expenses of $49,826.88, other funds of $106,385, gifts of $478.12, and capital funds of $25,882.84. And I signed that today, April 27th, 2023. And we have some gifts. Would somebody like to?
I'll do it.
Thank you.
I move that we accept the following gifts from Martha Ulver, number 996476, to support Crocker Farm at principal discretion, $10. From Martha Ulver, number 996497, to support Crocker Farm at principal discretion, $10. From Martha Ulver, number 996519, to support Crocker Farm at principal discretion, $10. And from Martha Ulver, number 996540, to support Crocker Farm at principal discretion, $10. From Robert and Joan McDonald, number 5866, to support Susan Vigiard Memorial Camp Scholarship in the amount of $300. And from ARPS PGO Inc., number 995202, to support Wildwood at principal's discretion, $750, for a cash total of $1,090.
Second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, I'll take a roll, not a roll call, such a long habit. We'll take a vote. All those in favor? And it passes unanimously. Thank you. And now I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Moved by Allison, seconded by Ben. No discussion. I'll take a roll, a hand vote. All those in favor? Passes 6-0.
All right.